put us on a bus and we went. Honestly, I still didn't care. It's just a confession, I shouldn't be confessing. Are any of you guys going to give me absolution?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Scarlet Sermons. It's actually just me today. Nobody's here, no speaker, just me. I'm going to be talking. Just kidding, obviously. My name is Anthony.
My name is Mark.
I'm Mina.
I'm George. And today we're joined with a special guest. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
I'm George Doss, one of the servants in East Brunswick.
George Doss. Everyone clap it up. Clap it up for George Doss. Sorry, guys. We're a little bit rusty. We haven't been recording a lot because of school and stuff. I know I'm speaking for everyone when I say school's been a little rough. It's been rough. Yeah, but, we're going to try to get back into it and start recording more. George, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
There's really not much to tell, but I'm a servant in St. Mary's, East Brunswick, and I'm also, my profession is an anesthesiologist. Been doing it for about over 30 years, and that's my life.
Awesome.
Hopefully he doesn't put us to sleep.
No, he won't. Trust me. With this topic, I know we won't be asleep. Mina, if you want to open the floor with any questions and stuff. And the topic, obviously. Yeah.
So the topic, or to start off, I think the theme of the season is like how to carry your cross. A lot of people wanted to hear more about the modern saints, and obviously the two that popped up the most was Pope Kyrillos and Pope Shenouda. So I think to start off, can you go more in depth about what it is to be a modern saint?
That's a very good question, because being a modern saint entails a lot of interaction with the society that may or may not have been a factor maybe centuries ago. The modern saints that we're talking about are people that we, some of us saw, maybe our parents saw them, and some of them we interacted with them through their sermons, or mediums that were not available to us prior to these centuries. So, for example, Pope Kyrillos, we can see photos of them, and Shenouda, we can hear his voice in recordings. So the modern saint, I think, is somebody who is more personified, more visual. Rather than just seeing the icon, we have memories. And I think that's a huge difference for the generations to come. An artist renders an icon of what he imagines a saint is. But Pope Kyrillos, for example, we don't have to imagine. We have his photos. We have what he looks like. We have maybe an old recording of how he moves and how he conducts himself. And so it brings a bigger dimension to what it is to be a modern saint.
So I guess going more into depth, we can start with Pope Kyrillos. Do you want to go into how he's a modern saint and how he impacted especially our generation or maybe our parents' generation?
I was talking to a group of people about Pope Kyrillos recently, and I was saying that Pope Kyrillos was one of those men who was able to catapult the church into the 20th century. He had a vision of spirituality that maybe it was present in the church before, but he wanted to embody that in everybody. Back in the day, churches were open only on Sundays, and prayer and liturgy was only on Sunday, but he wanted to bring liturgy to the forefront and the spirituality of the liturgy. And so he pushed for churches to open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day. every year, and he pushed for liturgies during the week. We didn't have that before that. Liturgies were only on Sunday, and then perhaps maybe a Sunday class on a Thursday afternoon. Being Friday being the day off for Egyptians, and so Thursday afternoon would be the time where children gathered in the church, and there was Sunday school. But his vision was to keep the churches open all the time, where anybody who was walking down the street saw a church can walk in and pray and see that there was life in the church. So that, I think that was a big a push that wasn't there before. And I think today we take it for granted. We're here near a church. It's busy. Anytime we, passing by after work, after school, in the evening, the church is open. That was not really present before his time. So Pope Kyrillos was the main factor for that. And I think that's a huge change for all of us. And it impacts all of us today because we benefit.
So, Uncle George, so a lot of these saints that we know in the church have sacrificed something for God. What is the sacrifice that Pope Kyrillos made, in your opinion, for the church? Like something like a story or,
I don't think he set out to sacrifice. I think we see his sacrifices. Certainly he was a pope that was persecuted. It's funny because in his time, people didn't like him as a pope.
Why not?
Because they thought that he was not leading the church. They thought the church was being led by inertia and that he was not present. But in fact, he was, because he prayed. He believed in prayer. He, anytime you would walk down the main cathedral church street, you could walk in and he was accessible. The common man could go up to the Pope and speak to him about their problems, and he came down and spoke to regular people. So he was accessible, but he believed in prayer, and he believed the power of prayer could change things and move things in the right direction. But at the time, people didn't see that. At the time, they thought he was a hands-off pope, and people found out later that that wasn't the case, and that his whole life melted in prayer for the church. And in fact, there are many things that happened in his papacy that dynamically changed the church, made it into a better, more stronger entity. Right away, for example, he consolidated the relationship between the Ethiopian church and the Coptic church by ordaining a patriarch for the first ethnic Ethiopian patriarch for the church. That was a big deal in Africa. It was maybe today, by today's standards, it wouldn't be an event that people recognize, but at the time it was huge for not just Egypt, but it was huge for the continent. The fact that he built the largest cathedral in Africa for St. Mark, that was an accomplishment. Bringing back the relics of St. Mark to Egypt, that was a huge accomplishment. After centuries of the relics being in Venice, who would have thought? So there were many events in his papacy. Of course, the apparition of Saint Mary for a very long time, up to a year, that was an extreme event that resonated not just in Egypt but throughout the world. It was a significant apparition that not only Christians saw but Muslims. And to this day, Muslims acknowledge that apparition. So it was a big. It wasn't a long papacy. From 1959 to 71, 11 years, but it was eventful, and people didn't recognize all of that.
Something that stood out to me that you mentioned was his accessibility. Just thinking about the fact that you could walk into church and see the Pope just there and be able to speak with him, that's like something I think unimaginable in like today's time. When we went to Egypt over the summer, like it was like a huge deal that we were meeting the Pope and that he has this whole like posse around him, all this security. It's like, and also like how you mentioned the standards from today and then now are completely different. So just imagining that you can walk into church and just see him and he's accessible to any conversation that you have is really interesting.
Yeah, students would go up to him during examinations, and they would have their textbooks with them, and he would open a page, and sure enough, every an exam would have a question or two from that page. So he was very famous for that.
Wish that was the case.
I need
today.
that now.
Yeah, wish that was the case today. Need that today.
Yeah. Won't we all? Cheat notes. But he was very accessible to the young, to the old, actually I was listening to an interview by MESAT. It's a satellite channel in Egypt, and they were having a conversation with Abu Rufail of Amina, who was one of his disciples from 1965 to 1969. And he was saying that they were around the Pope, but they were not allowed to be in the Pope's business. The Pope's business was his alone. So there was no hindrance, there was no barriers between the Pope and his people. I was just also listening to a story about a beggar who had decided to live near the outskirts of the cathedral walls, and he had passed. The priest was going in to pray, and before he was going in, he told him to, tell the Pope that I want to speak to him. And it turns out that beggar was actually a saintly person too. And sure enough, in the middle of the night, the disciples saw Ambakrolus coming down from his apartment and going to this beggar's little shack and sitting with him. Who would have thought, the Pope of Alexandria coming into a shack and sitting with a beggar? So that's how accessible he was.
Yeah. There was a point you mentioned about the Muslims also recognizing like the successes of actually two of our saints today, Pope Kyrillos and Pope Shenouda. I just wanted to transition to Pope Shenouda. I think when I went to Egypt, actually a lot of the times I hear like on the news, Pope Shenouda had a huge impact on like
Absolutely.
transforming us of what we look like to the world, especially the Muslims in Egypt.
Oh, absolutely. Pope Shenouda was called Bab al-Arab, the Pope of the Arabs, because every Arab country thought that he was a phenomenal person. When Pope Shenouda passed away, the Egyptian army, flew his body from the cathedral in Cairo to Wadi Natrun, to his burial place. And so one of the bishops inside the helicopter was thanking the highest ranking general who was on the plane. And he said, "Don't thank me. I thank him, because he was a nationalistic figure. He united the people of Egypt, Muslims and Christians." So Amba Shenouda was phenomenal in uniting the Arab world to the point where they all called him the Pope of the Arabs. He was instrumental in the Palestinian cause, whether I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but as a people, he defended the Palestinian people. He also was believed in the unity of the Arabs when it came to the Jerusalem question, and how Jerusalem was a city for not just the Christians but for the Arabs. And he refused to go to Jerusalem, even though after the peace accord of that President Carter and Sadat had formed, he refused to go to Jerusalem. He said, I'm not going to go to Jerusalem until I enter it with my Muslim brothers. A story about Ambashnuda was that when he was in the army, since these days we're in the Great Lent, and coincidentally, the month of Ramadan for the Muslims, he would actually fast with his Muslim colleagues in the army. And they would be very what are you doing? And he would say, no, if you're fasting, I'm going to fast with you. He didn't have to do that. But it shows you the kind of man he was. It shows you how he loved Egypt. Another story that he himself said, Mbashnuda, I don't know if you know, he was orphaned. When his mother gave birth to him, she died 2-3 days later after she gave birth to him. And he himself admitted that the wet nurses of the whole village, Muslims and Christians, breastfed him. So he believed in nationalism. He believed in Egypt. He loved Egypt as a country, unified under the reality of both Muslims and Christians sharing in that country. And he never, ever had this ethnic strife. He tried to bring it down, and he suffered for it. And we were talking about suffering before. I mean, he was under house arrest in 1981 because of his stance. But that it didn't mean he wasn't a coward, because he did defend the Christians when they were persecuted. He did stand up to the government when he thought things were unfair. But, he played a very fine line. And that was that took wisdom and courage and intelligence. He was also an army man. He was a captain in the army, in the Army Reserves, and he had gone into the I don't know what the equivalent is in English, but it was basically an academy like West Point. So he was very well versed in the art of strategy. So he there's so many things to say about Pope Shenouda, but Pope Kyrillos and Pope Shenouda, I think it's not right to separate them as patriarchs, because I think they both completed each other. If we zoom out and look at the history of these two popes, we see parallels that are very beneficial to the church, as well as to the country of Egypt, as well as to the church in general, the universal church, and how the Coptic Orthodox Church grew to what it is today. I truly don't think that if it wasn't for Amba Kyrillos and Amba Shenouda, I don't think the Coptic Orthodox Church would have flourished outside of Egypt.
I agree with that. I 100% agree. I think, when Pope Shenouda died, I remember that night, I was actually in church in a tasbeha, and they had to stop the entire tasbeha because the news came in. I remember the priest in my church said, today we lost something that, is so huge. I was a little kid, so I don't really remember it too well, but he said we lost something he said something about the gas to the fire. He said he kept the fire running in the church. He kept the blood going in the church, and keeping it lively all the time. I think he was a big
Well, Well, I had the blessing of, I went to medical school in Egypt. So I spent 7 years in Egypt, and I had the blessing of being able to go to his meetings every Wednesday for 7 years. So I, had intimate knowledge of Mbashnoda. My father was a priest at the time, so he knew me. I was able to, be close to him. Not as close as I wanted to. I would have loved to be a lot more closer, but yeah, I mean, my parents saw Ambakrulus, and they tell me that I saw Ambakrulus too as a child, but Ambashnuda I saw. Ambashnuda, I approached him. I think the first time I saw him, it was 1972, and then over the years I saw him countless times. He was a magnanimous figure. When he sat in the room, all eyes were on him, and it didn't matter who it was. If it was the president of the United States, or the president of Egypt, or dignitaries from all over the world. He met Prince Charles, he met Gaddafi, he met Yasser Arafat, he met all the dignitaries of the world, the head of the United Nations, and everybody who sat with him, he also met astronauts. So he met Carter, presidents. Everybody was fascinated by him. Obviously, he spoke several languages, but his wisdom, his laughter, his comedy, his poetry, obviously his sermons, it drew. If you didn't even understand the language that he was speaking, you were drawn to him through his facial features, his eyes, his smile. It was just a awesome feeling.
He's really funny. He's really funny. Like the clips, there's a lot of clips on like social media about like the jokes he makes, like even like during sermons. They're amazing.
Well, he once said, when I went into the monastic life, I was supposed to give up everything, but I forgot to give up comedy. So yeah, he laughed throughout his life. I remember going to see him during the time that he was under house arrest. So we went into to the monastery. Now, I know this generation can't grasp the intensity of that time, but it was a very terrible time for the church. It was a very taxing time emotionally for everybody, and we were all afraid for the church. But when we met him in the monastery, we felt at ease. We felt like nothing was going to happen, like everything was going to be okay. And many stories after that happened where his life was in danger, and they really wanted to actually get rid of him personally and physically, but it didn't faze him. His comedy remained the same, his calming effect remained the same, his spirituality certainly didn't change. He was just a magnanimous figure. It was just there's not enough that could be said about Ambashnoda.
So I know you said that they're basically continuation of each other, right? So you have Pope Kyrillos and then you have Pope Shenouda right after him, and they just carried each other's legacies, right? Just as us as college kids, how do we absorb what they said and take their spiritualness and their warmth and the features of their eyes and all of these unique characteristics that are only with them? How do we take those features and we apply it to ourselves and learn within ourselves how to be funny, how to be calming, how to be charismatic in situations when it's, you said it's the
See, that's the beauty of the icon, right? In the beginning of our talk, we were talking about a one-dimensional picture of an icon. You go up to an icon and you look at certain features, but it's limited because it's only one-dimensional. But for the modern saints that we know and we've seen and we've interacted with their personalities, that gives us a whole other dimension of things that we can learn. So, as an example, when one meets an adversity in their lives, we can recall how Ambashnuda reacted. He once said, "Don't ever let the world and the problems of the world enter your life. Keep it always outside." And he personified that. In adversity, he didn't change. His personality didn't change. His relationship with God didn't change. His smile didn't change. Did he have tears? Absolutely. I saw him in tears. Human interaction is not. It has to be applied. Meaning, when something makes you sad, you can be sad. When something makes you smile, you smile. You can interact, but the core of your emotion should never change. So, in life, we're going to have adversity. Anybody who's lived a life, anybody who's gone through life's stages, marriage. Even before that, a career, college, studying, and then go back and marriage and mortgages and life and children and parenting, and all of these are phases in life that cause happiness and cause sadness and cause anger and cause all the emotions in the spectrum of human emotion. You can interact with them, you can deal with them, you can you can have appropriate responses. But these saints teach us that even if you have appropriate human response, you don't forget that God is still there in this in the same measure, whether it be good or bad, because your perception of it may be good or bad, but as the Bible tells us, everything is for the good. And so if you have that in your background, you're going to be able to see beyond it, whether it be good or bad. Some people drown in goodness, meaning some people, revel in richness. For example, somebody gets a huge fortune, they revel in it and they drown in it. But people like Pope Carolus and Pope Shenouda and these modern saints, many in March. The funny thing about the month of March is that it produced so many contemporary saints. We have Amba Shenouda, we have Amba Carolus, we have Abuna Faltaus Suryani, we have Abuna Mikhail Ibrahim, we have Abuna Bshoy Kamil, just to mention, a few. But their common thread is that they interacted with the world through human emotion, but God still was present. You can see that God was there for them at all times.
Something that you mentioned before that I just had a question about was how all these important figures like the presidents and these astronauts went in to meet Pope Shenouda. Under what pretenses did they go to meet him, or like in what way, or how did they find out about him, or like what attracted them to go and see Pope Shenouda?
Wow, that's a good question. Everything was, everything's a cause and effect, obviously, and of course, when you're an international figure, you're either relevant or not, and so I think personally, the reason why many dignitaries wanted to see Amba Shenouda, it was because of his personality. In the case of President Carter, for example, Mbashnuda came to visit the United States for the first time in 1977. It was the first Coptic patriarch to set foot in the United States, in a new world, actually, to think about it, right? So he was invited to the White House, and that was the relationship. But I will tell you that years later, many years later, maybe even 25, 30 years later, Carter went to Egypt and made a point of visiting Mbashnuda in Cairo. To me, that says the meeting in the White House gave him a lasting impression of who Mbashnuda was. You know, why would he? I mean, an international figure. The only reason he's going to go to Egypt is to take a photo op in front of the pyramids, right? Right. But you know, for him to request a meeting with Mbashnuda, to me that says that this personality made a difference. Actually, I think he gave him a hand cross that was his personal hand cross at that meeting. So, you know, in the case of Arafat, for example, love him or hate him, I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but he appreciated the fact that Mbashnuda didn't have to speak on behalf of the Palestinian people. You know, most Palestinians are Muslim. Of course, there's a significant population of the Palestinians who are Christian, but you know, for the most part, most Palestinians are Muslim. And the fact that Mbashnuda fought for their right to exist and for their rights to have a homeland, that made a figure like Arafat want to meet Mbashnuda. In the case of Prince Charles, it was the same thing as Carter. When Mbashnuda visited again for the first time, a patriarch went to London. He was invited to Westminster Abbey, and again, I think it's the same situation where at the time Prince Charles was basically, he wasn't the king, but he certainly, the personality that he saw in Mbashnuda provoked him to, when he came to Egypt, again, request a meeting with Mbashnuda. And actually Mbashnuda took him on a tour of the cathedral and took him inside the St. Mark's Cathedral to show him the building. At the time, it still was the largest cathedral in Africa, so it was a significant, visit.
It's almost like people gravitated towards him just because of how he was.
Exactly. And that showed. Like many times when he came to the United States, and for example, we'd go and greet him in the airport. You know, I paid attention to the foreigners that were looking at us, looking at him, and sure enough, their eyes gravitated toward him because of his demeanor, because of his saintliness, because of his smile. You know, the way he greeted children. He was just a larger than life personality. You know, and the people that met Mbakrolos basically said the same thing about Mbakrolos. So it's not like it was different. And that's why I don't separate those two patriarchs from each other. I think they come as a unit. Mbakrolos was the first to send servants to Kuwait in a place that didn't have churches. So Mbashnuda wasn't the first. Mbakrolos was. Mbakrolos ordained the first bishop for social services. That had never happened in the church before. So Mbakrolos had a vision that was before his time. And anything that Mbashnuda did, he was just basically continuing the work that Mbakrolos started. So I think that's why I truly believe that both men are you have to study them as a unit together. And they interacted together, really. I mean, they met each other even before both were patriarchs. You know, and Bakrulus had an enclave that he had built outside of Egypt, outside of Cairo, a little monastic community. It wasn't monastic, but he made it into a monastic community, right? And some of these youth that were up and coming, servants in the church, they would go for a few days and stay with him. And one of the youth was Nazir Gayid, who later on becomes Pope Shenouda. So, you know, there was a healthy interaction between those two before they became leaders. You know.
Sorry, I know I'm getting a little greedy with the questions. One more question.
You gotta stop, bro. I'm joking.
I know you mentioned that when you went to medical school in Egypt, you went to the Wednesday meetings and you got a chance to, listen and to interact with Pope Shenouda. It's a little bit of a personal question. I don't know if you want to answer it, but what was one of the favorite maybe conversations or times you interacted with Pope Shenouda, and like what did you get out of it?
Yeah, I think one of the more memorable times was in the 70s when I think I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. I was in monastery, and I don't know if you guys visited Ambepshoy Monastery.
No, we didn't.
We did.
We did?
We did.
Okay, so
Yes, we did.
So have you seen the all that part where the patriarchal library or museum, all the way in the back? Anyway, that was not built in the 70s. So I remember Ambashnouda walking in the desert and showing the abbot at the time was Ambasarabamon, and he was showing him all his vision as to what he wanted to build in all these spots. And the reason why that's a wonderful memory for me is because I lived long enough to actually see his dream come true, and all the buildings that he had waved his staff and said, "Oh, I'm going to build this," and he did it in the sand. He said, "I'm going to build here. This I'm going to make into a church. This I'm going to make for new cells for the monks," and over time, 30 years later, I saw that happen, and I think that to me that's just a reflection of who Ambashnouda was. I'm going to do this, and it's going to happen. Another time I think is the meeting in during house arrest, where we were all in tears and we were all in fear, and he calmed us all, and that was memorable. Every time that somebody sat with Ambashnouda, they got something new. But I think for me personally, those two events are very deep for me.
I think hearing these stories of these saints, people hear this story of Saint Anthony, they think this saint was in the desert, faced many trials. I can't really relate to that. Or they hear this story about Saint George, 7 years suffered. They can't really relate to that. Saint Mary of Egypt. There's a lot of saints that people hear the stories and they just think that's pretty cool, and then they move on. But I think what's interesting about these two saints is as you said before, they've seen Pope Shenouda, they've heard him. So I guess, let's say someone's watching this, how can they relate, or once they hear the story about these two modern saints, and in their head maybe they think they can't be a saint or they can't be a modern saint because they can't put their shoes they can't fill their shoes. Sorry. So
yeah, I think
how can you encourage them, I guess, to follow the same path?
Most people have this notion that saints are superhuman. And God doesn't want you to be superhuman. He just wants you to be human. He created you to be human. You're not supposed to be Superman. Mankind in general loves to create an ideal that is unattainable. And I think that's part of man's problem, is that we create these visions that are unrealistic, and but a saint is not an unrealistic. It's tangible. Last week, a Syrian man, very good-looking man, very clean-shaven, very looks like he comes from a good family and whatever. He was captured by the fanatics that are happening in Syria right now, and they wanted him to rip out the cross that he was wearing, and he refused. And a couple of days later, they found his body mutilated. So, for me, there are the stories that happen on a regular basis shows you that these are regular people. Funny thing, when we talk about modern saints, let's talk about the 21, right? I'm going to make a confession here. I didn't really care. It's exactly like you just said. I didn't care. Nice story, and that's it. Last November, I had the chance to go. We had there was a medical mission that we went to in Egypt, and we were doing cases there, and we happened to be about 45 minutes away from the cathedral for the 21. And so they, at the end of the day, they put us on a bus and we went. Honestly, I still didn't care. It's just a confession, I shouldn't be confessing. Are any of you guys going to give me absolution? And when I got there, I was so moved, because each and every one of these people was a normal human being. They were just there to work. They had nothing to do. They weren't highly educated. They weren't anybody. They weren't a priest. They weren't deacons. They weren't anything in the church at all. And to hear their stories of how normal they were and what they sacrificed. Like, all of these people were newly married. They had little children, and that's what they were leaving behind. One of them had a broken arm, and they actually re-broke his arm so that they can tie him behind his back. So he was actually in pain before they beheaded him. And you see it. You see his cast, because they threw his cast by his body. So they were able to retrieve the cast. And you see all of these clothes that they were wearing. And, what I want to say is it's in hindsight, why didn't I care? I asked myself, why didn't I care? And then what made me care afterward? And I have to tell you, it wasn't because they were superhuman. It was because they were normal. They were just like you and me. They were regular people. And that's what's super about it. That's the lesson that I learned, that you don't have to be a big shot in the church to be a saint. That and that story resonates, because you see the clothes that they're wearing, you see their families still exist. All the women that are left behind as widows, all the little children that are now orphaned. That's tangible. Again, you look at an icon, maybe you don't recognize that St. Anthony had a sister, that St. George had a sister, but these people, these 21 men, they have families that still are alive, so they were normal people, and that's basically the lesson I learned from that.
So we heard a lot of stories from the patriarchs to the normal people who lived in their life. Like, how do we tie this together into carrying our cross, because each person is unique in what they do and how they worship Christ and how they worship God. So how do we take all of these different stories and all of these different characteristics of individual people and, create it into our own unique, because every time we hear a story, everyone hears it differently and everyone takes a piece of the story like according to themselves. So how do we tie all of these saints and all of these just average humans and apply it, uniquely to ourselves and what we can learn from it?
Well, you, me, him, all of us, we're just average humans, all right? But what unites us is that we're human. But each and every one of us has a story. Maybe not a story to be told, but a story inside our hearts. Meaning, you alone know what brings you down. You alone know what brings you up. And if going down, you don't forget God, and when going up, you don't forget God, that's a saintly life. That's the basic saintly life. That God is with you in your ups and downs. That is a lesson to be learned. It's not easy. It's easy to talk about, but it's not easy. Because forgetting about God is very easy. But remembering that God exists in everything that you do and everything about your life, it takes grit and takes it's an exercise. It's a spiritual exercise that you have to have every day. You have to nourish every day, and the more you nourish it, the more God becomes a part of you in your life. And like the Bible says, as He grows, you become smaller. Okay, saintliness again is not. See, the devil wants you to feel like sainthood is far away, but really it's not. Like I said, every one of us has a story, and only you know that story. It's a secret, but it's not a secret from God. God knows your story, and He's standing by and He's asking. He's the Bible says, I'm knocking on the door. If you open, I'll come in. So it's a reflection of are we going to open that door? For example, you're living your life on a daily basis. How many times a day do you open the door for God? How many times you interact with somebody else and you open the door for God? That's something you have to ask yourself. I have to ask me. Do I falter? Absolutely. But we can't forget. We can't forget that God is always present, but He's not going to impose Himself. He's not going to force Himself on you. You have to make the effort of opening the door. And these people, that's what they learned early on in their lives, to become what they are, what they became. It wasn't when they were 70. They started when they were young. Antonius was how old? 20? Something like that. These 21, none of them, I think, reached 30. Maybe one or two of them was over 30, but most of them were less than 30, right? They certainly, all of them had young children, infants. So when did they get this power? When did they get this power to overcome that blade that was behind their necks? One of the pictures of one of these martyrs is somebody looking up. Did you see that photo of one of them? He's looking up, and I'm every time I see that picture, I'm like, what are you looking at? What made you look beyond what you were leaving behind? You know, that's powerful. You know,
That was big right there. That was good. That's a real.
and that African man, that's a whole other story. But I mean, you know, I don't know if you guys know, they didn't even know where to bury him. He has no family. He had no family, and I think he's from Ghana or something. I don't know, but they searched to find his family. He didn't have any, and so the government of Egypt decided to take him so that he could be part of the 21, and so he's buried with them. And the local priest in that church said, you know, he said a prayer and said, Lord, you know, show me if this guy's a saint or not. You know, and sure enough, I think a woman who had some kind of disease or cancer or something like that prayed for that man to. I don't even know his name. Do we even know his name? I don't. To intercede, and sure enough, she was cured. You know, and just by her touching his casket, and so the local church, found out that he was truly a martyr with them. So we don't even know if he was Coptic Orthodox. I mean, but he's a martyr, you know, and God cherishes that.
I think his
We're not asked to be martyrs, but martyrdom doesn't always come in blood, you know.
Yeah, I was just gonna say his story. I think I was looking into this morning. Actually, I was really invested in them this morning. I don't know why. I saw this reel and I said, "This is really cool. Let me look into it." He was caught with them at the job site. He was not Christian, but when he saw them while they were being tortured and he saw their faith, he said, "I like when they were about to kill him. He said that like he kind of confessed that Jesus Christ is
Yeah,
the Lord."
that I knew. He wasn't. He interacted with them, and their power influenced him to be with them. Like he was drawn to the whole situation because of what he saw in them. I think there's a video circulating about them. You know, they were during the prison time. They were making. They were singing hymns and stuff like that, and he's standing there, not singing with them, but I think he's watching. Took it all in and became a martyr with them.
I think it's nice to see that with every saint or modern saint, there's something that people are attracted to. Right? So for the patriarchs, it was their facial expressions, it was how they carried themselves, it was their core. The martyrs, it's, you know, them holding faith, holding strength, you know, nothing changes what they believe in, and they truly believed in God, and people were attracted to that. That's why if you go to the cathedral, I'm sure it was busy. I'm sure there's a lot of people that went. It was such a big story because like that's just something unheard of, and I think that's a great takeaway and a good wrap up that every saint had something that just attracted, you know, the average human being to, and that's something very special. And as you said, that's what is the superpower. It's not that they were Superman; it was the features of God that allowed them to attract people.
So that they may see you and glorify your God in heaven, right? So yeah, I think what attracts us all to these saints, in essence, is something of God that touches us. So we see God in them, and that's the main takeaway.
Uncle George, we're so blessed to have sat with you and had this nice conversation.
It's my blessing.
Of course. Is there anything else before we go that you think we didn't cover, or one takeaway that you think if someone who couldn't get through this whole video should take away from this whole talk? One thing you want to leave everyone with?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's hard. It's hard to imagine, to personify somebody. But I think what's good about these two saints in particular is that, again, the most important thing is that go back, look at some videos, look at some photos, look at hear about the people that lived with these people, and see how they lived. take on just one thing from their life. Nothing big. If you take away from the life of Mbashnuda his smile that never parted from him, that's enough, I think. Because you know how many people rebel against God when something doesn't happen the right way? But for somebody to take just one little thing and say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to rebel against God. I'm going to take it in stride, and I'm going to always say that God is there all the time. If you take one thing and act on it, that's enough, I think, to make you grow. It's certainly better than staying stagnant, you know. For Pope Kyrillos, taking one aspect is prayer. You know, his whole life was prayer. So, like, if we can, and it doesn't have to be a long prayer. It doesn't have to be standing in front of God for hours. Just say, Lord, have mercy. You know, when something goes wrong, Lord, have mercy. But mean it. You know, have the resolve to mean it. You know, these one thing, just little things. You grow with these little things. You don't have to be Mbashnuda. You don't have to be Mbakurlus. Be you. But take these little things from their lives and apply it. So.
All right, guys. Before we go, obviously, you know, we have to talk about our socials. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, SoundCloud, Spotify. I know I keep saying SoundCloud and Spotify like we have anything on there. We obviously don't. We're on spring break now. I'm going to do my absolute best to get everything on. I'm not going to make any promises because I don't want to be a liar. Again, if you have any suggestions for the channel, any speakers, any topics, please let us know in the link in the video, or you can text on the Instagram account or find any of us, please. Before we go, it's been Anthony,
Mark,
Mina,
George.
and we're joined with
George.
We're so happy that you guys made it to the end of the video, and thank you so much for watching.
Peace.